So let's bring in the Chief Executive Officer of Infrastructure Bank, Mr. Adekunle Oyinloye. He joins me from our Abuja studios. Good morning to you, Mr. Oyinloye. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, but let's talk a little about the Infrastructure Bank. It was formerly known as Urban Development Bank, and then it was renamed to Infrastructure Bank in 1992. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what the bank is really all about?
Okay, once again, good morning and thanks. Urban Development Bank, as it was in 1992, has a specific remit to facilitate development of infrastructure. And to all intent and purposes, it was so structured to be able to facilitate development of infrastructure. Unfortunately, it didn't quite live up to its remit. And that was the situation until 2006, 2007, when earlier identified investor in the bank, the private sector, were finally invited to take the majority shareholding in the bank. So since 2007, Urban Development Bank became a government-sponsored but private sector-led entity. And since then, we have been trying to reposition the bank. And part of that repositioning effort was what led to the change of name in 2011, because it was set to be an infrastructure bank, and we felt that perhaps it should reflect its own name so that it can sleep, wake up, and think of infrastructure, particularly in an era where the gap is widening every day because of lack of spend and lack of focus.
Okay, so now since 2007, when Urban Development Bank became the Infrastructure Bank, could you just talk to us about the projects that the bank has actually invested in or helped to support?
Okay, basically, investing in is the last tail. If you know infrastructure is not a dash, infrastructure is indeed a marathon. Particularly if you want a sustainable infrastructure, it doesn't happen in a day. You need to plan, you need to structure, you need to even identify risk, you need to allocate the risk, and you need to get parties together. So since 2007, we've been involved in a number of landmark projects, particularly to bring to fore our capability in project finance and PPP in particular. We've done it from big to small. We participated in the the rail mass transit in Lagos. We bid it, and today we are the proud, preferred bidder of the Red Line, which is the biggest mass transit rail in Nigeria. Indeed, in Africa, is expected to carry about 1.8 million passengers a day from Agbado to Marina. We've also been involved in a number of market development, particularly in Yola South, which we are indeed very proud of, and that local government has since paid back the 5-year market development loan that we gave them. We've also been involved in advisory, particularly in the rail modernization of the Nigerian Railway Corporation. We've also been involved in helping FEMA to focus on road development in the past. We have also been advising a couple of bidders and concessionaires in the area of water and water reticulations, to say just a small. And right now, we're still initiating a number of projects that will cut across the country. So like I said, infrastructure is a marathon, not a dash.
Mr. Oyinloye, 2016 is a very critical year for the economy. Of course, talking about some of those key sectors, we're talking about power, we're talking about water resources, like you already mentioned, and we're talking about other parts of infrastructure like airports, and building bridges. Let's talk about sourcing of funds. The World Bank puts Nigeria's infrastructure deficit at around $300 million. So how does the bank think is the best way to source funds, particularly at a time when it seems as if there's a paucity of funds at the markets?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure about that number and figure you quoted. I know the spending gap for infrastructure in Nigeria on an annual basis today is about 23 billion US dollar. And that was the figure even some 3 years ago. And you would realize that we haven't done anything in the last 3 years. So if you calculate it again now, it probably will have risen far more higher than the 23 billion US dollar. Now, how do we raise funds? Our situation is getting compounded with the dwindling revenue from oil. But I can tell you that if we look inward a little bit, we have built some structures, some apposite savings that are quite germane for infrastructure development. In the last how many years, the contributory pension with just about 7 million contributors today stands at about 5 trillion naira, and very little of that has gone into infrastructure. So we need to look at how we can tap into that particular pool, because the intention was actually to make such money available for infrastructure. Now, the about 24 trillion Nigerian commercial banks deposit is also a veritable source of funding infrastructure if we look very critically inward. But the issue is, do we even have, sustainable infrastructure plan? Do we have bankable infrastructure assets for those investments to go into? So that's the critical thing, because sometimes we worry about the gap, we worry about where to get the money, but we sometimes do very little about getting projects, to be able to attract those funding that are readily available there. So for me, the question at this point is, how do we position ourselves to tap into those savings pools that are available locally? Because with the FX situation as it were right now, I'm very, very certain that foreign investors will be a bit wary at investing in Nigeria, particularly when they're not sure about to get their money out. So if you ask me, we have enough savings at home to do most of our infrastructure development. We just have to get it right and get the project well structured.
But then, Mr. Oyinloye, if you want to make a plan, you have to know what you're planning for. So the question is, does Nigeria know how much they're supposed to be catering for in terms of the kind of infrastructure that we need and the amount of infrastructure, and in what sectors that we need to have this infrastructure placed?
I will tell you, the National Planning Commission, which has now become Ministry of Budget and Planning, has done a tremendous amount of work. For the first time in a long while, we have a documented, infrastructure master plan. That particular master plan talks about a 30-year plan, which has been broken down into six-year cycle. So we now know what are the critical infrastructure. Because what is infrastructure? Infrastructure is an enabler. They facilitate easy access to market, to produce, and to well-being in the cities, in education, in health, and all that. So it's been well documented. We have a document to work with now. So what we need to do is to identify projects in that document and reprioritize them, particularly in the face of little or no, very little external or foreign currency entering Nigeria now. So that document, for me, is the Bible for infrastructure development as we speak. And I think that has been unveiled since last year. The ministry is now well strengthened. I believe that we can begin to identify projects and take it one after the other. Part of the challenges we have is this: when you have little resources, you need to reprioritize even much more than you did before. Because now we have infrastructure that are critical, but they are economically viable, in which case you can actually bring private sector towards the development of that. There are some that are critical, but not economically viable. So government might have to now use its own budget to deal with that. There are some that are critical, but, maybe we can shift it to another day. Now, you were talking about the sectoral allocation, so the worry is which one comes first. In the last 6 years, we've been spending money, or in fact 10 years now, on power. We don't seem to be getting there, but because of the decay of the past, because lack of attention will also increase your headache. If you go into water, most cities in Nigeria right now don't have adequate water supply, and we're buying water expensively, and many of them take us to the hospital. You know, our road network is horrible. Our railway has been in dilapidated state for years. So it's a worrisome thing. But again, that should not in any way, you know, make us feel that maybe the hill is too high to climb. So we need to sit down and prioritize based on resources, based on viability, and we bring partners that can help us solve the problem. As far as I'm concerned, there's not going to be enough of money of government to do infrastructure. So government has to make it, you know, possible for private sector to seamlessly engage with them, particularly for those that are economically viable and they can actually attract the right private sector consideration.
Mr. Oyinloye, let's take a break on the program. We'll come back and continue this conversation. We're talking about getting the private sector to key into providing a form of help for most of these critical sectors. And so we'll come back and talk about the relationship between the Infrastructure Bank and Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. Join us again.